Summer vacation started, and I live in town, close to school. I walk with my friends as usual, and there's a house we always see when we walk by. The house looks very old, and nobody has lived there for 4 years. I was wondering why nobody would buy the house because it's nice and big. All the house needed was to be fixed up a little. About 2 months later, a family decided to move in. There were 3 kids living there, and their mom and dad. They stayed there until school started again. The new student in my class was the boy who moved in the house in town. I wanted to know him better, because I knew almost everyone in town, except for him. By the way, his name was Matt. After school, I walked to my house with my friends. They all went to another friend's house, and I was walking with him. I asked Matt what the house was like. He said that it was kind of scary and that their doors closed and opened very fast by themselves. I asked Matt one more question. I asked him if he ever saw a ghost in the house or anything. He didn't speak for about 10 seconds. And then he said he took a picture of his dog and there was a blurry figure beside it. He asked me if I wanted to see it, and I said yeah. We were already in front of his house, so we went in the house for a while. When we got inside his house, the television turned on by itself. He said that it happens when he comes home. He went upstairs and then came back down. Matt showed me the picture. It was not made up. The black blur beside the dog was very strange. His parents then came in the front door. They were very nice and offered me to stay for dinner. I let my parents know, and they said that it was okay. Before dinner started, Matt and I were watching the TV for a while. Matt had the controller in his hand and was changing the channel until he stopped at the channel he wanted to watch. He put the controller back on the small glass table and suddenly, it changed itself. He picked the controller back up and put it back to what he was watching. It flew out of his hands, hit the wall behind him and broke into pieces. Then the television turned off. Whoever it was got really angry and did that with such incredible force. I had dinner and then walked home after. The next morning I walked to school and Matt was waiting for me. He said that his parents are thinking about moving from that house because it was getting really violent. After school, I told my parents about it, and they decided to help them find a nice house close to ours. They got along really well, and now until this day, Matt lives 6 houses to the left of mine. We're good friends. The house remains empty now, and I hope nobody moves there for their safety. My story begins around 1987. I was a somewhat normal 11-year-old boy up until that point. My parents were separated and it was a rough time for us. We lived in a tall apartment building on the 19th floor. I was interested in things like Dungeons and Dragons, but my mom never bought me that kind of stuff. I did borrow a book from a kid at school about the monsters in Dungeons and Dragons a few weeks before my experience began. The night was a little different than most because my mom let me sleep on the couch in the living room that night. It must have been a weekend. I think I might have had a nightmare because I woke up in the middle of the night. Off in my mother's room, I heard her boyfriend watch alarms start beeping. I heard him get up to turn it off. My mom muttered something and he replied. I didn't think anything of it. Sometimes the alarm would go on. I don't know if he knew how to set it right. A moment later, our VCR made the noise like when tapes start to play. I wasn't afraid at that point, but was just wondering what was going on. I sat up and began to look around the room. It was dark, but not very dark that night. I didn't see anything, so I laid back down to sleep. Looking up from this position, I saw the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It was sitting atop a candlestick decoration on the wall above me. My guess is it was 3 to 4 feet tall and 1 foot wide with the normal shaped body of a person. Its body was dark and the eyes were white light. I was terrified when I saw this and tried to get up and run away, but I was frozen. After struggling to move, I tried to call out, but what came out were strange tongues, mumbo-jumbo, if you will. The demon just sat there and laughed at me. I could see it had a mouth when it laughed, but I couldn't see much for features. Just a deep, dark black. Frightened and unable to do anything, I did the only thing I could. I closed my eyes and didn't open them again until morning. I told my mom and her boyfriend what happened, but they didn't seem to believe me. My mom thought it was because of that book and told me I needed to start going to church. So we started going to church, but it did little help. And I was afraid from then on. About a week later, it came to me again. I awoke one night and felt the same dreadful feeling as before. I felt its presence, and my ears would tense, like when you yawn. This time I wasn't about to open my eyes. I just laid there still, hoping it would go away. After a while, I must have been angered by my attempt to play dead. It struck the side of the wooden bunk bed hard, and yelled in a strange tongue. I immediately burst out of the top bunk and ran out of the room. I made it to the hallway, but suddenly got very dizzy and fell down. I got back up and ran to the bathroom at the other end of the hall. I flipped on the light switch, but it burned out. Terrified, I ran into my mom's room and asked if I could sleep in her bed. Sometime later, my friend that lived in the apartment building wanted to play Ouija board with me. We went to the center stairway of the building. This building had 3 stairways, 2 on either end of the building that had windows, and 1 in the center of the building with no windows. It was a dark, dirty cement stairway with metal rails. We started to play the game, and within moments the railing started to vibrate. The vibration turned into pounding and was getting louder and louder. It was coming from below us. We looked at each other, not knowing what it was. We ran out of there and back to his apartment. He swore not to play the game again, and we never spoke of what happened. Those were the 3 main paranormal experiences I had when I was wide awake, and physically things were happening. I was deeply afraid of the night after that. My younger sister would mock me and make faces at me at night. She slept in the bottom bunk in our bedroom. She would peer out at me from the bottom bunk making ugly faces, and I would beg her to stop. I would have nightmares of the visitation from then on, sometimes several times a week. I would always feel my ears tense with that feeling of dread and the classic sleep paralysis. I would try to speak in Jesus' name go away, but it was difficult. As soon as I could force myself awake, it was over. My mom also started to have some of these nightmares, but nothing like what happened to me. This went on until I was about 20. I finally became fed up with these terrible nightmares and yelled out for it to stop. I'm sick of this. I think I was so angry that I told it to show itself or I will kill it. I seriously meant business. That was the last time I ever had the nightmares. Seriously, after 10 sleepless years and who knows how many vivid nightmares, I was finally free. I don't know where it came from or why it chose me. My mom thought it was from before, when we lived in Hawaii and my dad was in the Air Force. My mom heard my 2-year-old sister talking to something. It sounded like it was trying to tell her it was her mom. She said the dog would walk around and bark at nothing outside at night. She thought Hawaii was a creepy place because of the weird beliefs of the natives. We had a big piece of coral as a souvenir that we took with us. My mom thought maybe it was cursed. She put it in a box and shipped it back to Hawaii. "Where'd you send it to?" I asked. She said she just put Hawaii on the box and sent it. My mother's grandmother used to live with them when she was a child, and she did some sort of witchcraft. She would put a glass of water in front of a picture of her husband who was dead and talk to him. They thought her room was haunted and saw ghosts in there. I don't know what she practiced. She could have been either German or Swedish. I don't want to ask my mom which side of the family her grandma was on to try and narrow down what practice it might have been. My grandmother on my father's side was a Lokta Sox Indian. When she was a young girl, she used to have dreams about things happening to people. She would tell the person she dreamed about, and usually something bad would happen to them. People also thought she was a witch because of that. I don't know if it was the Dungeons and Dragons book, a cursed coral from Hawaii, or spirits around my great-grandmother that caused my haunting. All I know is I defeated it, and I will never let it bother anyone else I know ever. Hopefully my story will help anyone having these nightmares visitations. I know it's real, but I don't understand why. It could be a blessing or a curse depending on how you feel about it. Thank you. This story may sound completely crazy and made up, but I swear to you it's not. I had 3 friends stay the night. I'm the only one who had a strong belief in ghosts out of the 4 of us. I had plenty of experiences before this night, and have many since, and will probably have more. But anyway, when my mother went to bed, I let my 2 friends drink some of my mom's alcohol. So 2 out of the 4 of us were completely sober, myself included. And my not-so-smart self decided, hey, let's make a paper Ouija board. Stupid. But hey, I was young. I made this fake Ouija board, and had found something to use as a cruiser. We all sat down in my living room. Now, when you look to the right of my living room, you'll see the kitchen table, then an open room with a huge glass sliding door. And we were sitting where you could see that door. Mind you, we lived in the middle of the woods, far away from any neighbors. Anyway, back on track. We started asking questions like, is anyone there? We asked it, what's your name? And it spelled out Sally. We all freaked out and blamed each other, saying, you moved it! No, you did. When we asked, how did you die? It spelled out Hang. That freaked us out. But we continued and asked it, how old are you? It went to the number 7. At this point, we are freaking out, not sure if the other was moving it. And we started laughing and stopped playing with it. All of a sudden, our motion sensor light outside our sliding glass door turned on. We all got scared and huddled into one another facing it. They all told me to go look outside and see if there was someone or an animal outside moving. So I went to go stand up and check, and we heard a loud bang on the slider door. So I quickly sat back down, completely terrified. Then we heard a little girl laughing, which freaked us out. We all sort of just sat there staring at this door. This is the part that sounds crazy. We noticed this image, almost as if a vision, sorta. We saw this park with a swing and a metal swing set. We noticed the little girl around the age of 7, hanging from the chain of one of the swings. I started to cry. Who wouldn't? Then it went away, and it was a glass door again, and the light was shining outside. We all asked each other what we saw, and we all saw the same little girl hanging from the chain of a swing. That was indeed the saddest and scariest experience I had ever had. But here's my question, because I'm much older now, and have gotten into spirits more since then. But supposedly demons are able to change form and do things most other spirits cannot do. Do you think we were tricked to believe it was a little girl by a demon? Or do you think it was actually a 7-year-old girl named Sally? Again, I realize how crazy this story sounds. If you knew the half of my stories, you'd lock me up in a hospital. But I swear on my life it's true. And I have 3 others who experienced it with me. My family moved to a house located 2 blocks from Riverside Park in Wausau, Wisconsin, in 1989. The summer before I was to enter the 2nd grade. Being that the park was so close, the neighborhood kids and I spent most of our summer vacation there, playing tag, fishing, and bike riding. There's a bridge that connects the main park to another section called Ferris Island. Obviously the name because the area is around the water. The water, of course, is jet black, either polluted or evil. The kids refuse to go to that section of the park because it's the most haunted. The story went that hundreds of years ago, a witch inhabited the park area. There was a boy who was fishing in the area and fell in the river and drowned. The townspeople blamed the witch and burnt her tiny hut. A bloody battle rose between the witch and the townspeople. Bodies of the townspeople were thrown in the river. Finally, when the battle ended, the townspeople buried the dead and left that area. The witch disappeared, but its spirit still roamed the park. I never investigated the story to confirm its originality. My cousins had an experience at Riverside once. One night, the cousins were hanging out with friends in the parking lot, standing outside their cars and talking. The only source of light were the vehicle headlights. All the park lights were dead. Gang members once infested the park, and the city just gave up on cleaning it. The group heard slurping sounds and splashing water. They looked towards the river and saw a dark figure hunched over near the riverbank, as if peeling and eating something. The figure turned around, and a pair of red eyes looked, staring back at them. As the figure walked closer, the group jumped into their cars and drove off, never looking back. They told the story to my father, and the next morning my father went to investigate. He came back with a report that there were open crawfish shells and decaying fish on the riverbank, but nothing more. The next story comes from my older brother, CK. CK works second shift, and he got off work at midnight. Having such a work schedule for weeks, he hasn't seen his buddies. So during one of his breaks, he called his friends and set up a time to hang out at night after work. They chose Riverside to meet up since it was close to where the friends lived and his workplace. After CK got off of work, he drove past IGA, a supermarket, where he saw his buddies in the parking lot loading beer into the back of their cars. CK waved to them and they waved back. CK went to the riverside to wait for the guys. He parked close to the riverbank, rolled down the driver's side window about an inch, then pulled down his seat and laid down looking at the night sky in his car. All of a sudden, he sees a woman with flowing blonde hair running past his car. She then came up to his window and tapped on it. CK got up and asked her what she wanted. At first, CK thought the woman was a victim because her clothes were ripped and her hair was distressed. The woman was in hysterical mode and crying. She slid her fingers through the driver's side window and told CK, "Everyone's dying, you have to help me. An old witch is down here, she's killing everyone. She killed my family. It's so bloody down there." And she wiggled her fingers towards CK. Thinking she's just another nut, he quickly closed his window. The woman jumped back. CK then backed out of the parking lot. Just as he was doing so, his buddies drove into the parking lot, and the woman walked in between the vehicles just as they passed each other. CK got out of his car and ran towards his friend. The woman was nowhere to be found. "Did you see her? Tell me you saw her!" CK shouted at his friends. "Who?" they asked. "That woman! She ran right in between our cars just as you guys were coming in," CK said. "We didn't see anyone," was the guy's response. Then CK said, "Man, what took you guys so long? You guys were just at IGA. It only takes 2 minutes to get here." The guys looked at each other and said, "What are you talking about? We were never at IGA. We came from the east side. We had to pick up stuff at my house." CK and the guys looked at each other and left home. They never ever met up at Riverside again. I remember things happening when I was about 3 years old. That's about as far back as I can remember. I had these 3 nicknames already: Monkey Boy, Spooky, and Baby Bones. I was called Monkey Boy because no crib can hold me. I'd somehow always find a way to climb out, no matter how high the bars were. Spooky because of my love for watching shock theater on my father's lap on Friday nights, and Baby Bones, well, my father's nickname was Bones. My mother or father would check in on me in the middle of the night. Apparently, Monkey Boy would find his way out of the crib one reason or another. Sometimes they would be awakened by noises and footsteps in the hallway, but Monkey Boy would be asleep. Sometimes they would find him sleeping under the crib to hide from the monsters, probably from watching too much shock theater. That was in Chotty, Wisconsin, in an old house on Pulaski Avenue. Once converted into a store, then back into a house again. My parents rented that house for almost 2 years, and then we bought a smaller house in St. Francis, just a few miles away. And soon after my brother was born. Sometimes I still slept under the bed. Sometimes my brother hid with me. Whatever was relentlessly bumping in the night in the old house apparently followed us to the new one. The noises were louder, and objects began to move. In particular, the basement door. One day, while our grandmother was watching us, the door burst open, ripping the screws from the chain lock out of the door frame. The door was chain locked to prevent my younger brother from falling down the stairs. We lived there for almost 5 years. During that time, the noises continued. The footsteps still echoed in the hallway, and although I never saw it, I knew there was something in the basement. Sometimes I would freeze at the top of the stairs and look down. My toy box and games were down there, but I couldn't get myself to walk down the steps. There were times I would be playing in the basement, and an overwhelming fear would cover me. I felt like screaming, but I remembered feeling as if whatever it was would surely get me if I made the slightest move or sound. It would soon go away, and I'd be able to run back up the stairs. I was in 5th grade when we moved again, still in St. Francis. We bought my uncle's house when his family moved. It was a nice house, right across from Green Park. I must have been 9 or 10 by then. My brother was 7 and my sister was 4. She was seeing monsters. I've been there countless times. My cousin and I almost inseparable, listening to Kiss albums, eating pizza, and drinking root beer by the 12-pack during sleepovers. The basement was a recreation room, carpeted, paneled, full bar, TV, and extra bedroom. Soon after we moved in, again I would find myself at the top of the stairs, afraid to go down and watch TV. The noises got louder. One night in particular, I was watching my brother while my stepfather was watching a game in a bar a few blocks away. We were in the bedroom watching TV when the thumping started. It sounded like someone was on the other side of the wall, in the hallway, banging his fist. Hard. Then it stopped. We made sandwiches in the kitchen. I was back in the bedroom when I heard my brother scream. He ran down the hallway, still screaming, and he jumped on the bed next to me. He said paper plates were flying in the kitchen. We both went into the kitchen and found about a dozen plates lying on the floor next to the basement door, which was closed. The plates had been on top of the refrigerator on the other side of the room. My brother was spreading peanut butter when the plates flew in front of him one after another. Suddenly something banged on the door we were standing next to, violently. We ran into the bedroom again. The thumping and banging literally chased us down the hallway into the bedroom. Both of us were screaming. I picked up the phone and called the bar, screaming for my stepfather. It took him 5 minutes to get home. It seemed like forever. The banging continued until he arrived. He heard it once, then it stopped. He checked the house and checked outside and found nothing. We talked about this recently. He doesn't remember us kids being so terrified as we were that night. We stayed there for a couple of years, and then we had to move. Something in the house was making my sister very sick. My parents thought it could be mold in her bedroom. She spent a lot of time in the hospital. Sometimes she was violently ill. She saw monsters. My sister has diabetes. We thought the monsters she saw were hallucinations due to low blood sugar. I took my wife, recently married, to this house, some 20 years after, and we stopped to talk to the current owner. Tactfully, I asked if she had experienced anything out of the ordinary since she's lived there. She said no. I mentioned a few things that I had experienced when I lived there, then she paused. Yes, she said. She told us about 10 years ago, on separate occasions, she and her daughter saw a demon in the basement. About the most evil-looking thing she's ever seen. Especially the eyes. She remembered it being red. She's never had a problem with mold in the house. We moved from there back to Gaddafi. Ironically, the first night we moved in, my brother and I laid on the floor in the bathroom and watched The Exorcist. I think it's funny now. A few months later, for the first time, I saw something. Up until we moved there, I had only heard things move, heard noises in the middle of the night, and been terrified by something I couldn't see. The noises continued. I almost got used to it throughout the years. I got used to seeing cupboards and doors which were closed wide open the next time I walked in the room. Now I was watching the doors open, and for the first time I was watching objects float through the room. For the first time I saw him, or is it, floating above the stairs, which again led towards the basement. I could see him from his top hat, past his shirt, the overcoat, down to his knees. I couldn't see his feet, but he was standing, or rather, floating in front of me. He was yellow with a red outline. I closed the door. Didn't look like a demon to me, but nevertheless disturbing. Things calmed down after a while. Months would go by without a sound or something moving around. It was like that for a few years. Then it became a bit bolder. He would come up behind you and breathe in your ear. You could feel his hand on your shoulder. Once he pulled me backwards off a chair and I landed hard, flat on my back. Things would happen more and more frequently. The unexplainable terror, the ice cube down your back fear that would grip you, became more frequent. For 8 years, the family dog would not go downstairs. I joined the Air Force after graduation and moved to California in 1985. I've pretty much been here ever since. As far as I know, nothing followed me, and none of the houses I've lived in since have been haunted. I've told friends here about my stories. Some believe, some don't. That's fine with me. I have old friends in Wisconsin who've experienced strange going-ons in some of the houses. Some of who refused to come inside after experiencing activity. Others thought it was cool. Sometimes I miss it, but I can live without it. My parents moved at least twice since I left Wisconsin. Activity continued, but appeared to diminish quite a bit. Now, my mother is twice divorced and lives with my sister. Still incognito. And apparently ghost-free. Everything I've written is true. Nothing is embellished to make the story sound more frightening. If anything, what I've written is on the subdued side. I could write pages more, but I'm already over the limit I tried to set for myself. To wrap things up here, if anyone thinks they have an explanation for the frozen in terror for no apparent reason thing, psychological or not, I'd like to hear it. Of all the things I've seen and heard, that sensation was still the most frightening of all. Ghouls, can you believe we're almost done with state ghost stories? I mean, don't worry, man. I got other state stories coming for when we finish these. But, like, it's nuts that I've been doing this for this long. And I have honestly enjoyed it 99% of the time. But yeah, thanks for sticking around, ghouls. Secret word is going to be salt, because I got myself a fucking Himalayan salt lamp, or whatever the fuck they're called, and it's great, and I love it. So, salt. In the comments somewhere, do salt. But my last video is on the top left, the next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone, or something, watching you.